The footprint was fresh. That's what I couldn't get past. Not dried mud tracked in weeks ago. Not a scuff mark I'd somehow overlooked during my initial sweep. Fresh. The tread pattern pressed clean into a thin layer of concrete dust that I know wasn't disturbed when I sealed the eastern corridor 9 days ago. I crouched there, with my headlamp cutting a narrow cone across the floor, and I counted the seconds of my own breathing, like a woman trying to convince herself she was still rational. One boot print, men's size 10 or 11, pointed deeper into the corridor, toward the mechanical room I hadn't opened since I'd claimed this bunker as mine on day 21. My name is Elise Vero. I was a trauma nurse for 11 years at St. Francis in Knoxville, before the outbreak made hospitals into slaughterhouses. I've been alone for 30 days. I've been alone in this bunker for 9. And until 40 seconds ago, I believed those two facts were related, that being alone was the price of being alive, and that this bunker was the sealed chamber where I'd purchased that solitude. Now I was staring at evidence that I'd been wrong about at least one of those things. I didn't move for a long time. The instinct wasn't to run. When you've spent a month on the surface, running from the infected, you develop a different relationship with enclosed spaces. Out there, every room is a potential trap. In here, every room was supposed to be mine. I'd cleared them. I'd sealed the blast door with the manual crank. I'd checked the ventilation shafts, too narrow for a human body, grated with welded steel. This was a decommissioned FEMA continuity site, Cold War era, built to keep things out. So either something had been in here before I arrived and I'd missed it, or the laws of sealed spaces no longer applied. I drew my knife. Not the machete I kept by the cot, the short fixed blade I wore on my hip even when I slept. I pressed my back against the corridor wall and listened. Nothing. The bunker had its own language of silence, the low electrical hum of the backup generator I'd coaxed back to life. The occasional tick of pipes settling, the whisper of recycled air through ducts. Nothing new, nothing wrong. But the footprint was there. And it was pointed away from me. Whatever had made it was ahead of me, deeper in the bunker. That thought should have sent me back to the main chamber where I'd set up my living area. Back to the blast door. Back to the option of cranking it open and disappearing into the nightmare above ground, where at least the threats were visible and behaved according to rules I understood. Instead, I stayed crouched and studied the print. Professional habit. In the ER, you observe before you act. You read the wound before you reach for tools. The boot had a worn heel left side ground down more than right. Whoever this was favored their right leg. The stride length, based on the single print and the absence of another visible mark in either direction, suggested they were moving carefully, placing feet deliberately, avoiding the dust where they could. They'd missed this one spot. I swept my headlamp along the floor ahead. Bare concrete, mostly clean. No further prints visible from my position. Whoever this was knew how to move quietly, and they knew this bunker's layout well enough to step only on the cleanest surfaces. That terrified me more than any horde pressing against a barricade ever had. I retreated. Slowly, silently, the way I'd learned to move on the surface, rolling each foot from heel to toe, keeping my weight centered, breathing through my mouth to eliminate the whistle of congested sinuses. Back through the eastern corridor, back past the supply room where I kept my water and canned goods. Back to the main chamber. I locked the interior door. Not the blast door, the interior partition between the main chamber and the east wing. Steel reinforced. Deadbolt thrown. Then I stood with my back against it and waited for my heart to stop hammering. 9 days I'd been in this bunker. 9 days of solitude I'd mistaken for safety. I need to explain how I got here, because the bunker didn't fall into my lap. I earned it in blood that wasn't mine. Day 1 of the outbreak, I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift. The first infected came through the ER doors at 3:47 a.m., a construction worker named Dennis Pale, according to his intake form. He'd been bitten by a co-worker on a night shift at a warehouse renovation. The wound was on his forearm, deep, already showing the gray-green discoloration that we'd later learn was the hallmark of active infection. He turned in exam room 3 while Dr. Keene was suturing him. I heard the scream from the nurse's station. By the time I reached the doorway, Keene was on the floor with his throat opened. And the thing that had been Dennis Pale was standing over him with its jaw working, not chewing, just grinding, testing, like a machine recalibrating. I closed the door. I'm not proud of that. But I closed it, and I held it shut while whatever Dennis had become threw itself against the other side. And I screamed for security until someone came. Security didn't solve anything. Within 6 hours, the hospital was overrun. I walked out through the service entrance with 2 other nurses and a respiratory therapist named Carlos. By day 3, Carlos was dead. By day 7, I was alone. I stayed that way. Not by philosophy, by attrition. Every group I found dissolved. Every safe house failed. Every person who said we should stick together eventually became a person I watched die or a person I fled from when they turned. By day 15, I'd stopped looking for people. By day 20, I'd stopped thinking of survival as a shared enterprise and started thinking of it as a physics problem. Mass, velocity, resources, shelter. I found the bunker on day 21. Or rather, I found the access road, an overgrown gravel track leading up a wooded hillside in the mountains east of Knoxville. The entrance was built into the slope, concealed by decades of kudzu and oak growth. A reinforced steel door set into a concrete frame, partially hidden by a rusted maintenance shed. The blast door was open, not forced unlocked from the inside and left slightly ajar, as if whoever had last been here departed calmly and without urgency. I cleared the bunker room by room with my flashlight and machete. 6 main areas: the entry vestibule, the main chamber, the east wing with its supply rooms and mechanical space, the west wing with bunk rooms and a medical bay, a command center with dead communications equipment, and the lower level housing water treatment, and the backup generator. Empty. Dust on every surface. No footprints. No signs of recent habitation. I sealed the blast door. I cranked it shut, and the mechanisms groaned like they hadn't moved in decades. I engaged the manual locks. I checked every ventilation grate. I made the bunker mine. And for 9 days, I believed I was alone in it. The night after finding the footprint, I didn't sleep. I sat on my cot in the main chamber with the interior door locked, my knife on my lap, and my headlamp switched off to conserve battery. The darkness in a bunker is absolute, not the darkness of a room with curtains drawn, where ambient light seeps through fabric. True darkness, the kind that erases your hands in front of your face and forces you to navigate by touch and memory. I listened. For hours, nothing. Just the generator hum and the pipe ticks in the air system. Sounds I'd cataloged, sounds I'd made peace with. Then, at what I estimated was 2 or 3 a.m., I'd lost reliable time tracking after my phone died on day 12. I heard something that didn't belong. A faucet, running water, coming from the west wing on the other side of the main chamber, behind a door I'd closed but not locked. The sound lasted approximately 15 seconds. Then it stopped. the clean mechanical sound of a tap being turned off. Someone was using the plumbing. I sat in the dark with my hand white-knuckled on my knife handle, and I processed this information the way I would process a patient presenting with impossible symptoms. Systematically, clinically. Fact: the bunker's water system was functional. I'd restored it myself when I got the generator running. The pipes fed from an underground well with a hand pump backup. Water ran to multiple fixtures throughout the facility. Fact: infected don't use faucets. In 30 days of observing them on the surface, I'd never seen one manipulate a tool, open a door with a handle, or perform any action requiring fine motor control or intention. They moved, they pursued, they grabbed and bit. They did not turn taps. Fact: therefore, whatever was in this bunker with me was human. Or at least, it was something that retained human cognitive function. This should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Because a human who had been sharing a sealed bunker with me for 9 days without revealing themselves was not a human operating from benign intentions. That was a human with a reason to hide. A human who'd watched me sleep, watched me eat, watched me go about the small rituals of solitary survival, and chosen to remain invisible. I did not open the West Wing door. I did not call out. I sat in darkness and waited for dawn that would never come underground. And I made a plan. Morning in a bunker is whatever you decide it is. I decided it was the moment I turned my headlamp back on, ate a can of pears with my knife blade, and took stock. I had 3 options. First, leave. Crank open the blast door, abandon the most secure shelter I'd found in 30 days, and take my chances on the surface where the infected had been growing in number and coordination every week. I'd watch them from the hillside before sealing myself in loose groups, becoming tighter clusters, individual hunters becoming something closer to packs. Going back out was going back to dying by inches. Second, confront. Open every door, search every room, find whoever was in here with me, and force a resolution. This assumed I could win that confrontation. It assumed whoever had been hiding for 9 days didn't know this facility better than I did, didn't have weapons I didn't know about, didn't have advantages I couldn't see. Third, observe. Continue my routine, but watch, listen, document. Learn who this was before they learned I knew about them. I chose the third option, not because I'm patient by nature, trauma nurses are many things, but patient isn't high on the list. I chose it because the person in this bunker had been surviving alongside me without taking anything I'd notice. My food supply was consistent with my own consumption. My water usage hadn't spiked. Nothing had been moved or disturbed in the areas I occupied. Whoever this was, they weren't stealing from me. They were surviving around me, and I needed to understand why. I set traps, not physical ones, informational ones. Tripwires for the mind. On the second day after finding the footprint, I began placing markers. A hair from my own head laid across the supply room door seam. A water bottle placed at a precise angle on the corridor shelf, its label facing 11 o'clock. A thin line of flour sifted across the threshold of the West Wing entrance, subtle enough to miss if you weren't looking, obvious enough to show disturbance. Then I established a visible routine. I made noise in the main chamber at consistent intervals. I ran the tap in the East Wing bathroom at what I decided was 8 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. I turned my headlamp off at a consistent time. I created a pattern that was predictable, exploitable. Because the best way to catch someone hiding is to give them a window they think is safe. On the third night, the flower line was disturbed. Not obliterated, redistributed. Someone had crossed that threshold, and attempted to smooth the flour back into position. They'd done a good job. But flour doesn't lie. The grain pattern was different, swirled rather than sifted, slightly thinner at the edges, where a finger or cloth had redistributed it. They'd gone into the west wing or come out of it. I also noticed something else that morning. One of my water bottles in the supply room was lighter than it should have been. Not empty, just reduced. Maybe 2 ounces missing. Such a small amount that if I hadn't been measuring, I'd never have noticed. They were drinking my water, but barely enough to survive. This is the thing about sharing space with a ghost. It changes your relationship with every object. Every surface becomes a potential communication. Every item, slightly out of place, becomes a sentence in a language you're still learning to read. By day 4 of Awareness Day. 34 of the outbreak. I'd built a rough profile. My cohabitant was disciplined. They moved at night or during my established sleep periods. They consumed minimal resources, enough water to prevent dehydration, but less than healthy. I never found evidence of food consumption, which meant either they had their own supply cached somewhere in the bunker, or they were going without. They knew the facility's layout intimately. They avoided every natural choke point. They used the mechanical room, the lower level, and potentially the ventilation maintenance crawlways, spaces I'd cleared initially but didn't frequent. And they were aware of my detection attempts. The smoothed flour proved that. They saw my traps and adapted. But they didn't remove them. They didn't confront me about them. They participated in the game without acknowledging it existed. This person was not afraid of me. But they were afraid of something. On the 4th night, I changed tactics. Instead of sleeping or pretending to sleep during my established dark period, I turned off my headlamp as usual, waited 40 minutes, then moved, silently, through the main chamber, to the west wing door. I put my ear against the metal and held my breath. At first, nothing. Just the baseline bunker sounds. But then movement, subtle, a shift of weight, the softest possible creak of a bunk frame. Someone turning over, someone alive, breathing, existing in a space 30 feet from where I'd been sleeping for nearly 2 weeks. I pressed my hand flat against the door and felt the metal cold against my palm, and I thought, there is a living person on the other side of this door, and they have chosen, every single day, not to let me know they exist. Why? The infected on the surface killed without hesitation or strategy. They were a force of nature, a hurricane with teeth. But this deliberate, sustained concealment, this was human in a way that frightened me more. Because humans hide for reasons, and reasons can be worse than teeth. Day 35. I broke the pattern. I'd been running my morning routine water at 8, inventory check, generator maintenance when I deliberately deviated. Instead of returning to the main chamber after checking the generator on the lower level, I took the maintenance corridor that connected the lower level to the west wing's utility space. I'd only been down this corridor once during my initial sweep. It was narrow, pipes running along the ceiling, emergency lighting dead. My headlamp made the space feel even tighter. The beam couldn't spread, just punched forward into the dark. The corridor ended at a utility closet that backed against the west wing's medical bay. I'd noted this during my first pass, but hadn't spent time here. Now I did. The utility closet was different from how I'd left it. The metal shelving unit on the east wall had been shifted, not much, maybe 6 inches away from the wall. Behind it, barely visible unless you were looking, was an access panel. Not a vent, a maintenance panel for the plumbing junction, roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, large enough for a person to squeeze through. It was unbolted. I crouched in front of it and made a decision that would have seemed insane a month ago, but now felt like the only option that respected both my survival and my sanity. I pulled out the small notebook I'd been using as a journal, one of those cheap composition books I'd found in the bunker's command center, and I tore out a page. I wrote 6 words. I know you're here. I'm Elise. I slid the paper through the gap at the bottom of the access panel. Then I replaced the shelving unit as closely to its original position as I could manage, and I left. It took 2 days to get a response. On the morning of day 37, I found my own piece of paper on the floor of the main chamber, just inside the interior door. It had been slid under in the night. My 6 words were still there. Below them, in handwriting that was cramped and controlled, written by someone conserving both paper and energy, were 3 more. Don't look for me. I stared at those words for a long time. The handwriting was angular, possibly male, though that's an unreliable assumption. The ink was from a ballpoint pen, faded, pressed hard, as if the pen was running dry and force was the only option. Don't look for me, not a threat, not get out, not this is mine. Just don't look, a request, almost a plea. I wrote back that same morning, different paper, left in the same spot under the interior door. Are you hurt? This time the response came within hours. I found it when I returned from the lower-level generator check. No, please, just let it be, let it be. A strange phrase for the apocalypse. A phrase from a world where people had the luxury of boundaries, of privacy, of spaces that belonged only to them. A phrase that assumed both parties had options. But we didn't have options. We had a sealed bunker with finite water, finite fuel for the generator, and an outside world that was becoming less survivable by the day. I'd seen it deteriorating before I sealed myself in the infected, growing in density, moving in coordinated waves, responding to sound with frightening speed. Whatever was happening on the surface was getting worse, not better. And in here, in this tomb of safety, someone was asking me to pretend they didn't exist. The nurse in me said, "This person is not okay. Isolation, minimal water intake, no evidence of food." They were declining. Deliberately, perhaps. Withdrawing not just from me, but from the act of survival itself. The survivor in me said, "This changes nothing." The bunker was still sealed. The resources were still mine to manage. If this person wanted to waste away in the West Wing, that was their choice. I didn't owe them intervention. I didn't even know them. But I was a trauma nurse for 11 years. And I have never in my life been able to walk away from someone who was dying. I left food, not confrontationally, not as a demand for contact, just a can of soup placed on the floor outside the West Wing door at what I designated as evening. No note, no conditions. The next morning, the can was gone, taken silently in the dark. I did this for 3 days. Each morning, the offering vanished. On the 3rd day, I found something left in return. A folded piece of paper placed where the can had been. Inside, a single word. Why? I didn't answer in writing this time. Instead, I spoke. I stood at the West Wing door, not opening it, just standing near it, and I said, "Because I can hear you getting weaker. Because I have enough to share. Because whatever you're afraid of, starvation is a bad solution." Silence. Long enough that I thought they wouldn't respond. Then muffled through the steel, "You don't know what I'm afraid of." A voice. Male, middle-aged. Rough from disuse, the voice of someone who hadn't spoken in weeks. But coherent. Present. "Then tell me," I said. Another silence. Then, not yet. I accepted that. Not easily. Acceptance isn't my natural state. I'm the kind of person who reads the end of the book first, who pesters lab techs for results before they're ready. Who needs to know? But I'd spent 37 days learning a new economy of patience, and I spent it now. We developed a system. I left food and water outside the West Wing door twice daily. It disappeared. Occasionally, notes appeared. Short, practical, never more than a sentence. Generator fuel is low. West Wing has a reserve tank. Thank you for the beans. There are 7 infected visible from the West Wing periscope. New group came from the south. That last note froze me. The West Wing had a periscope? I hadn't found one during my initial sweep, which meant either I'd missed it or he'd concealed it. Either way, he could see the surface. He was monitoring the outside. And what he reported chilled me. 7 infected near the bunker entrance. I couldn't verify from the East Wing, no periscopes, no cameras. I had to trust his report or crack the blast door to look for myself. I chose trust, not because I'd earned it, because the alternative was opening a sealed door to check on threats I couldn't fight. The next note elaborated. They're not leaving. They're standing in the tree line, not moving, just facing the hillside. I'd seen this behavior on the surface before I'd sealed myself, and infected standing motionless for hours, oriented toward a stimulus only they could detect. Waiting. Other survivors had called it sentinel behavior. Nobody understood what triggered it, but it always preceded a surge. Always. The infected knew something was here. They couldn't get in, but they could wait. And suddenly, the bunker that had been my salvation started feeling like what it had always been. A sealed box with no exit. Day 40. The generator coughed. I'd been managing fuel, carefully running it 4 hours on, 4 hours off, keeping the battery bank charged enough for emergency lighting and the water pump. But the fuel level was dropping faster than my calculations predicted, which meant either my estimates were wrong or the generator was less efficient than its specifications suggested. Without the generator, the bunker became a tomb. No water pump, no air circulation, no light. The air system had a passive backup convection-based ventilation through the vertical shafts, but that provided airflow, not filtration. And without the water pump, I'd have to access the hand pump on the lower level, which produced a fraction of the output. I mentioned the fuel situation in my morning note. The response came faster than usual. I can show you the reserve tank, but you'd have to come to the West Wing. An invitation. After 6 days of communicating through a door, the first offer of shared space. I stood in the main chamber reading those words, and I weighed the risk the way I'd weigh any clinical decision. Patient presenting with unknown condition, limited history, incomplete assessment. Best available option involves calculated exposure. Okay, I said to the door. When? Now is fine. His voice was closer than before. He was standing just on the other side, waiting. He'd known I'd come today. He'd felt the generator falter too. I unlocked the West Wing door for the first time since finding the footprint. The deadbolt slid back with a sound that seemed too loud for what it was. Just a mechanism. Just metal moving against metal. But it felt like more. It felt like a seal breaking. I opened the door. The West Wing corridor was dark. My headlamp cut through it, revealing concrete walls identical to the East Wing, same construction, same Cold War-era utilitarianism. But different. Objects lined the corridor walls. A sleeping bag rolled precisely against the baseboard. A military-style canteen on a small shelf. 3 books stacked with their spines facing inward. A habitation. Minimal but intentional. He stood at the far end of the corridor, backlit by the faint glow of what I'd later learn was a chemical light stick, the kind with a 12-hour lifespan. He'd been using those instead of electricity, conserving the generator for me. He was tall, thinner than healthy, with a sunken look of deliberate deprivation. Dark hair cut short but growing out. Civilian clothes, unremarkable. Work boots with a worn left heel. His hands were at his sides, open, not holding anything. A deliberate posture. I am not a threat. The universal language of someone who knows how threat is perceived. I'm Marcus, he said. Elise. Though he knew that already. The reserve tank is in the mechanical room. Through here. He turned and walked deeper into the west wing without checking if I followed. Not dismissive, trusting. Giving me the choice to follow or retreat without the pressure of being watched. I followed. The mechanical room was behind the last door on the left, the same room the original footprint had been pointed toward. Inside, bolted to the wall, was a 200-gallon reserve fuel tank I'd completely missed during my initial sweep. A transfer pump connected it to the main generator's fuel line. The valve was shut. I shut it off, Marcus said, standing by the far wall, keeping distance between us. When you arrived. So you wouldn't find it too quickly. So you wouldn't look around too much. You were already here, I said. Not a question. I've been here for 2 years. 2 years. The words didn't make sense at first. The outbreak was 37 days old, but the bunker was decades old. And Marcus wasn't talking about the outbreak. I was a facilities maintenance contractor for FEMA, he said. This site was decommissioned in 2007. I was part of the team that maintained it during wind down. When the contract ended, they didn't change the locks. I kept my keys. He'd been using the bunker as a living space. Off-grid, invisible. For reasons he didn't explain, and I didn't push. When the outbreak hit, he was already inside. When did you seal the blast door? I asked. Day 1. I heard the emergency broadcasts. I sealed it and stayed. But it was open when I found it. His expression shifted something between guilt and calculation. I opened it on day 20 to check, to see if it was over. A pause. It wasn't. I saw what was out there. I came back inside. And then I showed up the next day. Yes. And you hid from me. He looked at the floor. Yes. Why? The question hung between us in the mechanical room with its diesel smell and humming pipes. Marcus was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was flat, not evasive, controlled. The voice of someone delivering information they'd rehearsed. Because the last time I let someone into my space, I had to kill them. He told me about it in pieces. Not all at once. Marcus wasn't a storyteller. He was a man who assembled facts the way you'd assemble a repair, methodically and without embellishment. Before the outbreak, he'd shared the bunker once. A woman. A relationship he described with minimal detail. It was complicated, was the most he offered, and I didn't press. She'd found his living situation. She'd demanded to stay. Things had escalated. He'd asked her to leave. She hadn't. She came at me with a fire axe from the emergency station, he said. I didn't have a choice. I watched his face while he spoke. 11 years of trauma nursing gives you a sense for dissembling the micro-expressions of people constructing narratives versus people reliving them. Marcus wasn't performing. He was reporting. The flatness in his voice wasn't concealment. It was scar tissue. That was 8 months ago, he said. I sealed the blast door after. I wasn't planning to open it again. But you did. Day 20. I thought maybe the world had changed. Maybe whatever was happening out there would force a reset. Maybe I could... He trailed off. It doesn't matter. I opened it, I saw the dead walking, and I sealed it again. Then you came. Why didn't you just tell me you were here? He looked at me directly for the first time. His eyes were light gray or pale blue, hard to tell in the chemical light's green cast. Because I didn't know if I was safe. Safe from me? Safe for you. I process this the way I process everything. Clinically first, emotionally later. A man with a history of violence justified or not living in sealed isolation, hiding from a stranger rather than risk another confrontation. This was either profound self-awareness or profound manipulation. But the facts didn't support manipulation. He'd had 9 days of me sleeping unprotected in the main chamber. 9 days of knowing the bunker's layout, its weapons, its advantages. If he'd meant me harm, I'd have never found the footprint. I'd have simply never woken up. Instead, he'd hidden. He'd gone hungry to avoid disturbing my supplies. He'd used chemical lights instead of the generator's power. He'd made himself as small as possible. The fuel valve, I said. You can open it? He crossed to the tank and turned the transfer valve. I heard the pump activate somewhere below us, pushing diesel from the reserve into the main tank. 200 gallons. At my current consumption rate, that was weeks of runtime. Months, if we were strategic. Thank you, I said. He nodded. Didn't move toward me. Didn't extend a hand. Just stood by the wall with his arms close to his body, occupying the minimum possible space. I'll go back to the east wing, I said. I won't lock the door. You should lock it. I'm not going to. He didn't argue. I left the mechanical room, walked back through the west wing corridor, passed through the connecting door into the main chamber. I didn't lock it behind me. I sat on my cot, and I stared at the open door, and I thought about the fact that for the first time, in 37 days, I was choosing to be vulnerable. Not because I trusted Marcus. I didn't have enough information for trust. But because I was a trauma nurse, and I'd spent my entire career walking into rooms where the outcome was uncertain, and the only way forward was through. The infected outside changed everything. Marcus's notes about the 7 sentinels in the tree line proved accurate. Using the periscope he'd installed in the west wing, a repurposed naval surplus scope threaded through a ventilation shaft, I could see them myself now. 7 figures standing motionless among the oaks, facing the hillside. Facing us. On day 42, there were 12. On day 44, 20. They didn't approach the bunker entrance. They didn't try to breach the maintenance shed or the blast door. They just stood, arranged in a loose semicircle along the tree line. Their gray faces turned toward the hillside with the vacant intensity I'd seen in other sentinels on the surface, waiting for whatever signal would convert standing into swarming. They can't get in, Marcus said. We were in the command center neutral territory between his wing and mine. He'd agreed to share the space for practical discussions. We kept a table between us. The blast door is rated for significant overpressure. They'd need tools. They're not going away, I said. No. What happens when they get a signal? What happens if the group grows to 50? 100? He didn't answer immediately. Marcus had a habit of silence that I was learning to differentiate from evasion. Sometimes he was thinking. Sometimes he was deciding how much to reveal. There's a second exit, he said finally. I set down the water bottle I'd been holding. What? Emergency egress tunnel. Built into the original design. It exits on the north slope, about 300 meters from the main entrance. The outlet is concealed. It looks like a drainage culvert. You've known this the entire time? Yes. Were you going to tell me? I'm telling you now. I bit back the flash of anger. He was right, he was telling me now, when the information was relevant. But the fact that he'd withheld it, that he'd let me believe we were sealed in with one exit, while the infected accumulated outside that exit, landed in my chest like a fist. If we need to leave, he said, we can. North slope, away from where they're gathering. We? He looked away. You, if you need to leave. That night, I couldn't settle. Not because of fear, something else. Something I recognized from years of working with patients in crisis. The specific agitation of a person whose situation has fundamentally shifted and whose old framework no longer holds. I'd entered the bunker thinking I was alone. Then I discovered Marcus and recalibrated around shared space. Now I was recalibrating again, around the fact that our sealed box had a back door, that the surface was leaking in through the periscope images of growing infected crowds, and that Marcus, with all his careful distance and deliberate smallness, was the only person in the world who knew where I was. I got up from my cot and went to the west wing door, open as I'd been leaving it. The corridor beyond was dark, but I could smell the faint chemical tang of a light stick further in. Marcus, I said into the darkness. Not loudly, just enough. A pause. Then his voice, from somewhere deeper in. Yeah? How many were there today? 23, 2 new ones from the east. Are they still just standing? Still standing. What do you think they're waiting for? Silence, then sound, movement, something alive. They know something's here. They just can't find the entrance. But if we run the generator, the exhaust vents to the north slope, away from them. And it's baffled, designed to minimize noise signature. So they're not hearing the generator. No, they're sensing something else. I thought about this. Warmth, vibration, some frequency we couldn't perceive. Or someone led them here, Marcus said. The thought hadn't occurred to me. The infected following not finding, but following a living person who had led them to the hillside and then disappeared. Someone who'd approached this bunker and left before entering, or someone who'd entered and was still here. Is there anyone else? I asked. In the bunker, besides us. Marcus's answer was immediate. No. You're sure? I've lived here for 2 years. I know every space. There's no one else. I believed him, but the infected kept gathering, and something had drawn them here. Day 45. 30 infected in the tree line, and a new development. 3 of them had moved from standing to pacing. Short, repetitive paths 10 feet forward, 10 feet back, like animals in a cage. The transition from sentinel behavior to kinetic behavior. In my surface experience, this meant hours, not days before activation. I told Marcus. He went quiet in the way that meant real thinking, not evasion. The north tunnel, he said. We should prep it. We. He'd said it again, and this time he didn't correct himself. We went together the first time we'd moved through the bunker as a pair. The tunnel entrance was in the lower level, behind a secondary blast door that was smaller than the main one. Marcus had the key. The door opened onto a narrow concrete passage wide enough for single file, ceiling low enough that Marcus had to duck. It stretched into darkness, a gradual upward slope heading north. 300 meters to the exit, Marcus said. Steel hatch at the terminus. It opens outward into a drainage channel. From there, it's forested hillside. No road, no trail. Have you been out through it? Once, last year, to check it was clear. We walked the tunnel. Our headlamps. His was a battered Petzl, held together with electrical tape bounced off walls that grew damper as we progressed. The engineering was impressive. No collapses, no flooding, ventilation holes drilled at intervals through the rock above. Built to last. At the terminus, the steel hatch was bolted from the inside. 4 manual bolts, each requiring a wrench to release. Marcus had the wrench on his belt, next to a ring of keys I'd never noticed before. "If we have to run," he said, "we unbolt this, open it, and go. I'll take the wrench with me." If they find the tunnel outlet, they won't. It's concealed. No sight line from the main entrance, different slope entirely. I pressed my hand against the cold steel hatch and felt or imagined the outside through it. Air, sky, infected. The world I'd sealed away. "Let's not need this," I said. "Let's not," he agreed. On the way back, the generator died. Not a cough, not a sputter, just silence, the sudden absence of the hum that had been our baseline for days. The lights in the lower level went out. Emergency battery strips activated, casting red-tinted light at floor level. "Fuel line blockage," Marcus said immediately. He was already moving, back toward the mechanical room, his headlamp bobbing ahead of me. "Happens with old diesel. Sediment from the reserve tank. I should have filtered it." I followed him, but as we reached the lower-level corridor, I heard something else. From above, from the main level, a sound, muted by concrete and steel, but recognizable to anyone who'd spent time on the surface. Pounding, many fists, against the blast door. The generator dying. The sudden silence had given them a trigger. The absence of the vibration or electromagnetic signature they'd been sensing. Something had changed, and the infected had responded. They were no longer standing. They were moving. "Marcus," I said. "I hear it." He stopped, turned. His face in the red emergency light was all shadows and angles. "The blast door will hold. It'll hold." "You're sure?" "It's built for bombs, Elise, not bodies." But the pounding continued, and grew. Not just fists now. I could hear the impacts differentiating. Palms, elbows, heads. The dead throwing themselves against a door they couldn't breach, but trying. Endlessly trying. Marcus fixed the fuel line in 12 minutes. I know because I counted. I stood in the mechanical room doorway, and I counted the seconds while he disassembled a fuel filter with hands that didn't shake, cleared the sediment blockage, and reassembled it with the precision of a man who'd maintained this equipment for years. The generator coughed, caught, held. The hum returned. Above us, the pounding didn't stop, but it didn't get closer either. "They'll tire," Marcus said, wiping his hands on his pants. "They don't tire. You know that." He looked at me, nodded. "Then they'll break their hands, and they'll keep trying with stumps, and eventually there won't be enough left of them to make contact with the door." He was right. I'd seen it before, infected battering themselves to pieces against barriers, reducing their own bodies to uselessness in their drive to reach whatever was on the other side. The blast door would hold, but we'd hear them dying against it for days. "The north tunnel," I said. "Not yet," Marcus said. "Not while they're in frenzy. If any of them have circled the slope." "You said the exit is concealed." "It is. But I said that before 30 of them were actively hunting. We wait. We see what happens when they exhaust themselves." I hated it. But he was right. The bunker was holding. We had fuel, water, food. We had time. What we didn't have was silence. The pounding from above went on and on, a rhythm like a broken heartbeat, relentless and mindless and eternal. Day 47. The pounding had diminished, not stopped diminished. Fewer impacts, less force. Through the periscope, I could see the carnage at the blast door entrance. Bodies collapsed in heaps, arms mangled, skulls fractured from repeated impact. Some still twitched. Some still raised ruined limbs and pressed them against the steel. But the fury was spent. Others, though the ones that had arrived later, the fresher ones, stood further back, watching, not battering, not approaching, just watching the door with those empty, calculating stillness that was worse than frenzy. "They're learning," I said. Marcus was beside me at the periscope, close enough to see, far enough to maintain the careful distance he always kept. Over the past days, that distance had shrunk incrementally, not touching, never touching, but the space between us had gone from 10 feet to 6 to 4. A gravitational drift neither of us acknowledged. "They're not learning," he said. "They don't have the capacity for... Look at them. The first group battered itself apart. The second group isn't doing the same thing. How is that not learning?" He was quiet, looked through the periscope again, stayed there a long time. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, so they're adapting. What does that mean for us?" "It means the blast door is enough for now, but it might not be enough forever." We began preparing in earnest, not panicking preparing. There's a difference, and it lives in the hands. Panic makes you fumble. Preparation makes you precise. Marcus mapped the north tunnel route beyond the exit hatch. He'd been out once before, a year ago, and he sketched the terrain from memory. Forested hillside dropping northeast toward a creek, then rising again toward a ridgeline. No roads within a mile. No structures he'd seen. Dense cover, but difficult footing. I inventoried portable supplies. Food we could carry. Canned goods were heavy, but calorie-dense. Water, canteens, purification tablets from the medical bay. Medical supplies, antibiotics, bandages, suture kit, painkillers. I made 2 packs, one for each of us, balanced for weight and necessity. Marcus watched me make 2 packs and said nothing. But that evening, for the first time, he sat in the main chamber. Not on his side of the table, not in the doorway. In the main chamber, on the floor by the wall, with a book open on his knees and a chemical light stick providing the barest green glow. He didn't speak, neither did I. But the space between us held something different now. Not trust, exactly. Not comfort. Something more fundamental. The acknowledgement that we were 2 people facing the same wall. And the wall was getting closer. "Why did you stay?" I asked him. This was day 48 evening. We were eating together for the first time canned stew. Heated on the small propane burner I'd found in the supply room. Sitting on opposite sides of the table in the command center. "Stay where?" "Here. For 2 years, before the outbreak. You had keys. You could leave any time." He stirred his stew without eating. "Couldn't go back?" "Because of what happened with her?" "Because of what happened to me after." He set down his spoon. "I spent 15 years working jobs that put me in enclosed spaces. Tunnels, shelters, mechanical rooms. I was good at it. Then I came back from a maintenance rotation and couldn't leave. Not physically couldn't. Mentally. The open felt wrong. Too much space. Too many variables. Agoraphobia, or something in its family. I'd seen it in patients, the progressive narrowing of comfortable space, until even a house feels too large. until only one room will do, until even that room needs its curtains drawn and its door locked. So you stayed, I said. I stayed, and the world narrowed to fit, and then the world actually ended, and it turned out I'd been training for it without knowing. He almost smiled. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but the muscles moved in the right direction. And now there's a reason to leave, I said. Now there's 30 infected outside the front door, and possibly more circling the hillside, and a generator that might fail again, and a food supply that won't last past 60 days, and... He stopped, took a breath. And someone I don't want to watch die underground. He said it flatly, without inflection. The way he said everything like a facilities report, like a status update. But the words themselves were not flat. The words themselves were the most human thing I'd heard in 48 days. Day 50. Something changed on the surface. I looked through the periscope in the morning and counted. 44 infected visible, more than ever. But their behavior had shifted again. They were no longer focused on the blast door. They were oriented outward, facing away from the bunker, toward the valley below. Alert, tense. Some in that pacing state, some locked in the sentinel stance, all pointed in the same direction. Something was coming. There, Marcus said, taking the periscope. Southeast, on the old logging road. I waited while he adjusted focus. People, he said. 2, moving fast, running. I felt the word like a physical impact. People. Living people, running, which meant running from something, which meant the infected below were about to be between those people and whatever they were fleeing. They're heading toward us, Marcus said. They must have seen the maintenance shed. They think it's shelter. I closed my eyes. The old calculus, the one from the previous world. The one that governed every emergency room decision I'd ever made. You can't save everyone. Triage isn't cruelty. Resources are finite. But I opened my eyes and said, the North Tunnel. Marcus pulled back from the periscope. No. We open the North Hatch. We get to them before the infected do. We bring them back through the tunnel. Elise, we don't know these people. We don't know what they're carrying, what they'll do. They're going to die. People die. They've been dying for 50 days. Not in front of me. Not while I can reach them. He stared at me, and I saw it, the conflict in him. The 2-year weight of isolation, fighting against the presence of a person who dismantled his solitude piece by piece. The fear of opening the box. The fear of what comes in. You can stay, I said. I'll go alone. You won't make it alone. You don't know the terrain. Then come with me. The North Tunnel felt different at speed. Shorter. The upward slope that had seemed gentle was now steep enough to make my calves burn as we jogged. Marcus led, his headlamp bouncing, the wrench already in his hand for the exit bolts. He had them undone in 30 seconds. The hatch opened outward with a groan of protesting hinges, and the outside hit me like a wall light, air, sound. After 17 days underground, the surface was overwhelming. Noon sun through a canopy of oak and hickory. The smell of earth and rot. Birdsong impossibly normal. And screaming. Coming from below and to the south. Marcus was already moving sure-footed on terrain he'd only walked once a year ago, but navigated now with the focus of a man who'd made a decision and committed. I followed, machete drawn, pack bouncing on my shoulders. The hillside dropped steeply. We descended through underbrush, following the sound. Through a gap in the trees, I could see the logging road below and on it. 2 figures running. a woman and a teenager. The woman was limping, the teenager pulling her forward by the arm. Behind them, 6 infected, fresh ones, fast ones, closing the gap with that horrible loping run I'd seen so many times, not quite human movement, too fluid, too relentless. Marcus stopped, pulled something from his pack I hadn't seen him put there, a road flare. He cracked it, waited 1 second for the red phosphorus to catch, and threw it. Hard. Downhill, into the road between the runners and their pursuers. The flare landed hissing and spitting on the gravel. And the infected, all 6 stopped, turned, oriented on the flare's light and sound and heat with the instant focus I'd only seen in the newer ones, the ones that were faster, more responsive, more present. "Move!" Marcus shouted down the hillside. "Up here! Follow the sound of my voice!" The woman and the teenager didn't hesitate. They veered off the road, crashed into the underbrush, and started climbing toward us. The infected behind them were still fixated on the flare, but that would last seconds, not minutes. Marcus threw a second flare, further from the road this time, pulling the infected's attention south and east, away from our position. Then he was grabbing the teenager's arm, hauling her up the last few feet of slope. And I was catching the woman who was older than I'd thought, late 40s, her left ankle swelling visibly through her boot. "Follow me," Marcus said. "Fast, don't stop." We ran. Their names were June and Becca, mother and daughter. They'd been moving for 2 weeks, coming from Chattanooga, following the mountains north on the theory that rural meant fewer infected. They'd been wrong, but they'd survived being wrong through sheer stubbornness and the willingness to run. We got them through the north tunnel. Marcus sealed the hatch behind us, all 4 bolts wrenched tight. And we stood in the lower level of the bunker with our headlamps making the 2 newcomers blink and squint. June's ankle was sprained, not broken. I examined it in the medical bay while she gripped the examination table and breathed through her teeth. Becca, 16, dark-haired, silent, watched from the doorway with an expression I recognized. The face of a teenager who'd been running too long, and had stopped trusting that stopping was real. "You have a bunker," June said, her voice incredulous. "A real bunker." "It's real," I said, wrapping her ankle. "You're safe." "For how long?" I didn't answer, because the answer was, I didn't know. We'd left the blast doors sealed. We'd re-entered through the north tunnel and locked it behind us. But we'd been on the surface. We'd thrown flares, we'd shouted. We'd made enough noise and heat to draw attention. "If the infected tracked us to the north hatch, the tunnel's sealed," Marcus said from the corridor. He'd read my expression or my silence. They didn't follow. I watched. "You can't be sure." I waited at the hatch for 90 seconds after sealing it. No impacts, no sounds. The flares worked. But the flares had drawn the group on the road away from the runners and toward the south slope, which meant at least 6 infected were now on the south face of our hill, closer to the bunker, adding to the numbers already at the front entrance. We'd saved 2 people, and we'd possibly tightened the noose around our own shelter. June and Becca took the west wing. Marcus didn't offer I suggested it, and he agreed with a nod that cost him something visible. His space, given away. His careful 2-year architecture of solitude dismantled in an afternoon. He moved his sleeping bag to the lower level, the mechanical room, near the generator, near the fuel, near the north tunnel. I understood what he was doing, positioning himself at the escape route, not for himself, for all of us. The last one out, the one who'd sealed the door. That night, with June and Becca sleeping in the West Wing bunk room, I found Marcus in the command center. He was sitting in the dark, no chemical light, no headlamp, just sitting with his back against the wall. "You okay?" I asked. "There are people in my space." "There have been people in your space for 17 days. There's been you. That's different." "Why?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, "Because you didn't need me to be anything. You just needed me to be here." I sat down across from him. The darkness between us was complete, but his voice located him 3 feet away, slightly left. Close. "They're going to need things from me," he said. "They're going to need direction and safety and answers." "No," I said. "They need shelter and food and medical care. I can handle the last one. The first 2 exist without anyone providing them." "It doesn't work like that. People need a structure. They need—" "Marcus, you don't have to be in charge. You just have to be present." Another long silence. Then a sound that might have been a laugh, if laughter hadn't atrophied from disuse. "Being present," he said. "That's the hardest thing you've ever asked me." "I know." Day 53. The periscope showed a change I didn't expect. The infected at the front entrance were leaving. Not all at once in ones and twos, peeling away from the group, walking back into the tree line, disappearing down the hillside toward the valley. Within 48 hours, the group of 40+ had reduced to 11. Then 7. Then 3 stragglers who seemed disoriented, circling aimlessly before drifting south. By day 55, the blast door entrance was clear. "Where did they go?" Becca asked. Her first voluntary question since arriving. We were gathered in the command center, all 4 of us, which still felt strange, the space too full after weeks of solitude and then cautious pairing. "Something drew them away," I said. "Sound, movement, another group of survivors passing through the valley. Could be anything." "They'll come back," Marcus said. Not pessimistic, factual. "They always come back." But for now, we had breathing room. For now, the bunker's seal was holding, the generator was running, and 4 people were alive underground when the surface wanted them dead. June healed quickly. Within a week, she was moving without the wrap, helping me reorganize the supply room, taking inventory with the efficient pragmatism of someone who'd managed a household before managing survival. She didn't ask about Marcus's history. She didn't ask about the 2-year habitation. She accepted the bunker's reality as presented and operated within it. Becca was harder to read. 16 and silent, she'd lost, June told me privately, her father on day 12. Her brother on day 20. She'd watched both of them turn. Not bitten, turned. The infection's airborne vector, the one the early broadcasts had mentioned before broadcasts stopped entirely. Not everyone was susceptible. But Becca had watched 2 people she loved cross the threshold from alive to dead, to animated without a single wound. She slept with a knife. I didn't comment on it. At 16, in this world, a knife while sleeping was just common sense. On day 58, I found something that rearranged everything I thought I knew about the bunker. I was in the lower level, checking the water pump, when I noticed a seam in the concrete wall I'd never examined closely. Behind the pump housings, partially obscured by pipe runs, was a panel, not an access hatch, not a maintenance plate, a cabinet, flush-mounted and painted to match the wall. I opened it. Inside were files, paper files and manila folders, yellowed at the edges, stamped with faded federal insignia. FEMA, Department of Health and Human Services. Dates ranging from 1987 to 2004. Most were administrative supply manifests, maintenance logs, personnel rotations. But one folder, thicker than the rest, was different. Its label read, Continuity Protocol Biological Event Site 7. I pulled it out and opened it on the pump room floor, and I read about my bunker. This facility wasn't just a continuity of government shelter. It was a biological monitoring station, designed to house personnel during pandemic events while they gathered data on pathogen behavior through, I read the phrase 3 times, surface observation apparatus and specimen acquisition protocols. The periscope wasn't a modification Marcus had made. It was original equipment, and the term specimen acquisition protocols was accompanied by a diagram of the North Tunnel, with an annotation I hadn't seen when we'd walked it. A side chamber, midway through, with a reinforced door and a small observation window. A holding cell, built into the escape tunnel, designed to bring infected specimens inside the bunker for study. I closed the folder. My hands were steady, because after 58 days, steady hands were all I had left. But my mind was reeling. This bunker was built to contain infected people. 30 years before the outbreak. 30 years before anyone should have known what an outbreak would look like. Either this was unbelievable foresight, or the people who designed this bunker had known something about what was coming, and they'd built a cage for it. I didn't tell the others. Not yet. Not until I understood what it meant. I went to the North Tunnel the next morning, alone. And I found the side chamber exactly where the diagram indicated a door I'd walked past twice before. Flush-mounted, unmarked, invisible unless you were looking for it. It was unlocked. Inside, a 10 by 10 concrete room with a reinforced glass observation window set into one wall, looking into the tunnel. Steel eye bolts in the floor. A drain. Emergency lighting dead. And scratches on the walls. Not fresh. Old. Decades old. Fingernail marks in concrete. Worn smooth by time. Something had been kept here before. Long before Marcus. Long before me. Long before day one of an outbreak that wasn't, perhaps, truly day one of anything. I stood in that room, and I felt the bunker reshape itself around me. Not a shelter, not a tomb, a laboratory, a watching post. Built by people who'd known what was under the surface of the world, and had prepared to study it when it finally broke through. I never told Marcus about the files. I never showed June or Becca the holding cell. Some knowledge is a weight that doesn't distribute evenly. It just crushes whoever holds it. What I did was this. I stayed. We all stayed. The infected came and went in waves, drawn by stimuli we couldn't predict, dispersed by forces we couldn't see. The bunker held. The generator ran. The food diminished slowly. And we planned for the day we'd need the North Tunnel, not as an escape, but as a road. Marcus learned to sleep with people nearby. Not easily I'd hear him awake in the mechanical room at odd hours, pacing the 3 steps his space allowed. But he stayed. He didn't retreat further. And some mornings I'd find him in the command center before dawn. And he'd nod at me. And the nod contained more than I could have extracted from an hour of conversation. I don't know who built this bunker or what they knew. I don't know if the outbreak was a surprise or an inevitability. I don't know if we're survivors or specimens. But I know this. There is a man who hid from me for 9 days because he was afraid of what he might become. And he chose visibility over safety. There is a woman healing from a wound her daughter watched her endure. There is a teenager who sleeps with a knife and is learning, slowly, to leave it sheathed. And there is me, Elise Varro, trauma nurse, 58 days alive, writing this by chemical light in a bunker that has more secrets than I'll ever uncover. I don't understand the person sharing my shelter. I may never fully understand him, but he is here, and I am here, and the door between us is open. In this world, that's not trust. It's something stranger, something that has no name yet because the old names don't fit the shapes we've become. The footprints in the dust pointed deeper in. I followed them, and what I found was not a monster, not a saint, but a person unfinished, afraid, and alive. Like me. That will have to be enough.